been waiting for you, my child.
You. Too much? Sorry.
Do you ever think about those sitcoms, the ones you could only watch when television felt like a shared experience? In the golden age of TV, these shows were more than just background noise. They were part of your evenings, your family, your rhythm. What changed so much that we never got shows like these again? Family Ties was not just a sitcom about a family. It was a tug-of-war between two generations trying to make sense of America. From the very first episode, it set up a cultural battleground. Two liberal, ex-hippie parents raising a Reagan-worshipping son in suburban Ohio. That setup could have been a gimmick. Instead, it became a lens through which the country looked at itself. Michael J. Fox as Alex P. Keaton was electric. He was funny, yes, but also complicated, principled in his own way and full of contradictions, and viewers loved him for it. The show tapped into a very specific moment in time, the early 1980s, when the idealism of the 1960s was giving way to the ambition of the 1980s. It was a conversation every household was having, about money, politics, values, but wrapped in warmth, punchlines, and Thursday night comfort. The tension between Stephen and Elise's past and Alex's future was not just narrative, it was emotional. It mirrored the generational shifts happening across America. And somehow, Family Ties made that feel intimate, not political. But it was not just about Alex. Mallory and Jennifer, the Keaton daughters, brought their own rhythms to the mix. Mallory with her heart-on-her-sleeve sweetness, Jennifer with her sharp young logic. And later, little Andy added a softer counterpoint to Alex's ambition. The cast had a chemistry that you could not fake, and the writing was sharp, willing to tackle big topics like nuclear war, racism, addiction, but always grounded in character, not lectures. Family Ties lasted 7 seasons. It won Emmys. It launched Michael J. Fox into superstardom. But more than that, it defined what a sitcom could do when it took its audience seriously. It did not need surreal gimmicks or oversized characters. It just needed a living room, a couch, and a family trying to figure out what mattered most. Looking back now, it feels like lightning in a bottle. Not just because of how well it captured the 1980s, but because of how it gave both sides of that cultural divide a place at the table. It was not trying to pick a side. It was trying to start a conversation. And that is something you could only get during the golden age of television. Gimme a Break was not your average family sitcom, and Nell Carter was not your average sitcom star. She played Nell Harper, a housekeeper who steps in to help a widowed police chief raise his 3 daughters. But the show was never just about cleaning or parenting. It was about a woman holding a family together, often better than the father ever could, with humor, grace, and strength that felt absolutely real. From its very first season in 1981, Gimme a Break pushed boundaries without making a show of it. Here was a black woman as the emotional center of a white household, not a sidekick, not a stereotype, but a lead. Nell Carter brought timing, warmth, and grit to every scene. And that kind of performance? It was rare then. It is still rare now. The show was a balancing act. It had broad laughs, yes, but it also hit hard when it wanted to. It talked about race. It dealt with death, poverty, eating disorders, and it never flinched. The laugh track was there, but so was the honesty. Nell was the reason it worked. Her relationship with the kids felt earned, layered, full of real love and real frustration. As the seasons went on, the show shifted. New characters came in, the tone leaned more into sitcom comfort. But even when it lost some of its original bite, it still carried something special. Because of Nell. She was not just reacting to the chaos around her, she was driving the show's emotional core. And you could feel it, even in the goofiest episodes. Gimme a Break does not always make the lists. It does not get the retrospectives or reunions. But for those who grew up with it, it left a mark. It showed what sitcoms could do when they let someone unexpected lead the way. And it gave us one of the most quietly groundbreaking performances in TV history, without ever raising its voice about it. This was a show built on heart, and that kind of thing never goes out of style. Different Strokes did not just ask what would happen if two Harlem kids moved in with a white millionaire, it asked what America would do with that idea. It premiered in 1978, and from the start, it knew what it was. Bold, funny, a little chaotic. But underneath the laughs, it had something to say. About race, about class, about growing up in a world that did not always treat everyone the same. Gary Coleman's Arnold was the breakout star, with his famous line, his big eyes, and that perfect comic timing. But the heart of the show was the relationship between Arnold, his brother Willis, and their new guardian, Mr. Drummond. It was a sitcom family formed not by blood, but by circumstance. And that made it even more resonant. This was not just a show about parenting. It was a show about learning how to understand each other, and back then, that felt radical. Different Strokes did not shy away from serious topics. One week it was about bikes and bullies, the next about racism, sexual assault, drug use, and it did all of that while still being something kids could watch with their parents. That balance was tricky, and sometimes uneven, but it tried, and that mattered. The show ran for 8 seasons. It spun off other series. It made household names out of its young stars. But it also carried the weight of what happens when child fame outpaces the real support needed behind the scenes. And in that sense, its legacy is complicated. But its impact is not. Because Different Strokes showed America a new kind of family. And it did it with humor, courage, and more honesty than most people expected from a half-hour sitcom. It was messy, it was moving, and it could only have happened in the golden age of television. One Day at a Time was not flashy. It did not have big sets, loud costumes, or surreal storylines. But what it did have, every single week, was truth. This was a sitcom that walked into the real world and dared to stay there. Ann Romano, played by Bonnie Franklin, was not a quirky sidekick or perfect sitcom mom. She was a divorced woman raising 2 daughters while trying to keep food on the table and her sanity intact. And that setup alone? That was revolutionary for 1975. This was a show about survival, emotional, financial, personal. Valerie Bertinelli and Mackenzie Phillips played daughters who pushed back, questioned everything, and sometimes completely fell apart. And the show let them. It did not smooth the edges. It aired their bad choices and growing pains in real time. There was a rawness to One Day at a Time that other shows just avoided. It was not afraid to show a mom breaking down or a kid saying something cruel. It knew that life inside an apartment with 3 women trying to hold it together was rarely clean or funny. But when it was funny, it hit hard because it came from something real. There was catharsis in the laughter, not distraction. And it was not just about the family. The building's superintendent Schneider became something more than comic relief. He was part of their world, flawed, protective, and occasionally wise. The show let characters fail, let them grow, and it did it all while staying inside that small apartment. One Day at a Time tackled addiction, domestic violence, sexual harassment, teen pregnancy, all before those things were comfortable to say out loud on television. And it did it in primetime, on network television. It was not ratings obsessed, it was message obsessed. And it found its voice in a time when sitcoms were mostly about jokes. It ran for 9 seasons. People grew up with it. People grew in it. And if you were watching in the 1970s or early 1980s, you remember what it felt like to see something that real and something that mattered tucked between a laugh track. One Day at a Time was a sitcom, but it was also a lifeline. Perfect Strangers was never supposed to work. 2 grown men, one a neurotic Chicagoan, the other a wide-eyed shepherd from a fictional Mediterranean island, moving in together and navigating daily life like a live-action cartoon. It sounds ridiculous, and honestly, it was. But somehow, it was also perfect. Larry Appleton and Balky Bartokomous were opposites in every way, and that was the point. Their mismatched friendship turned into a masterclass in physical comedy and emotional warmth. This was not just slapstick for slapstick's sake. It was a sitcom that leaned into heart, even while it was falling over itself. Balky was more than a funny immigrant trope. He was kind, wise, and endlessly curious. Larry was more than a high-strung straight man. He was insecure, driven, and ultimately loyal. Together, they reminded viewers that family is not always something you are born into. Every week, they bumbled their way through American bureaucracy, romantic mishaps, and kitchen disasters, and you watched because it felt like joy. Set in the late 1980s and early 1990s, Perfect Strangers reflected a version of America where the melting pot still felt like something to aspire to. There were cultural clashes, but never cruelty. Balky's misunderstandings were not punchlines. They were doorways to understanding, and that is rare. The show spun off Family Matters. It helped shape ABC's iconic TGIF block, and even if you do not remember every episode, you remember Balky's smile, the accent. Don't be ridiculous. It was goofy, it was kind, and it was never cynical. Perfect Strangers did not last forever, but for a few years it gave television something pure and reminded viewers that comedy can come from care. 227 felt like home. The kind of show where the hallway gossip mattered just as much as the main plot, and neighbors were not just side characters. They were family. Set in a Washington, D.C. apartment building, it followed Mary Jenkins, played by Marla Gibbs, and a vibrant cast of characters that brought everyday Black life to primetime with humor, grace, and realism. Before representation was a buzzword, 227 just did it. It showed a middle-class Black family living their lives. Not struggling, not exceptional, just real. Marla Gibbs had already made her mark on the Jeffersons, but here she took center stage. Mary was smart, opinionated, and deeply rooted in her community. She sparred with her best friend Rose, clashed with the hilarious Sandra Clark, Jackie Harry, and mothered her teenage daughter with the kind of strength only sitcom moms can pull off. It was Black joy, Black culture, Black complexity, and it aired on NBC in 1985. The show did not rely on catchphrases or gimmicks. It relied on its people. Jackie Harry won an Emmy for her role, the first Black woman to do so in a supporting role for a comedy. The chemistry between characters was electric, the dialogue snapped, and the laughs were earned. But more than anything, 227 felt lived in. It was about friendship, community, and showing up for each other. It was about porch conversations and late-night advice, about the women who ran their neighborhoods with humor and a little side-eye. The show ran for 5 seasons, and every episode was like a visit to someone's house. You knew the layout, you knew the people, and you always left feeling a little better. 227 was never loud, but it was solid, steady, proud, and in the golden age of television, that kind of honesty was worth everything. Alice was never meant to feel polished, and that was exactly the point. Set in a dusty Phoenix diner called Mel's, the show followed Alice Hyatt, a single mother rebuilding her life one plate of chili and slice of pie at a time. It was loud, it was gritty, it was warm, and for millions of viewers across 9 years, it was something rare. A working-class sitcom that actually felt like work. The kind of show where hairnets, ashtrays, and sass came standard. Alice was not glamorous. She was real. So were her co-workers, Vera, the anxious sweetheart, and Flo, the sassy southern firecracker with a line for every situation. Kiss My Grits became iconic not because it was clever, but because it came from someone who seemed like she had been holding it in all shift. The diner setting never changed, and it never had to. People came in, people left. Life happened. It was one of the first sitcoms to show single motherhood without pity. Alice was not broken. She was not waiting to be rescued. She was getting by day and finding joy where she could. It is easy to underestimate a show like this in retrospect. No sweeping plots, no big hook. But Alice worked because it understood its own rhythm. It let characters breathe. It let moments land. It let the audience get comfortable, then surprise them. And that was its quiet power. The chemistry between the cast carried it through cast changes, writing shifts, and even network pressure. And while the show dipped in and out of critical favor, the people watching at home stuck with it. Because shows like Alice made them feel seen. It was not about dreams. It was about keeping the lights on, raising your kid, and maybe laughing along the way. In an era of big city sitcoms and suburban fantasies, Alice brought it all back to the counter. The clink of coffee mugs, the gossip by the register, the waitress with a tired smile who still remembered your order. It was comfort television, not because it was soft, but because it was familiar. You could not make a show like Alice today, not without irony, not without someone trying to elevate it. That was the magic of its time. Alice served up something honest, with fries on the side. And in the golden age of TV, that was more than enough. Benson was the kind of show that snuck up on you. At first glance, it was a spin-off, born from Soap, one of the most offbeat sitcoms of its time. But Benson carved its own path, and quickly. It gave us a character who had once been a wisecracking butler and turned him into a voice of reason in a room full of chaos. A political sitcom, a character comedy, and somehow also a workplace show, all wrapped around the calm, cutting charm of Robert Guillaume. Benson Dubois was smart, steady, and unbothered. The kind of man who could shut down a room with a single look or a perfectly timed quip. The show followed his rise through the ranks of a fictional state government, eventually becoming lieutenant governor. That kind of arc was rare in sitcoms, especially for a black lead in the 1980s. But Benson did not make a big speech about it. He just kept showing up. The show was never flashy, but it was sharp. The writing had bite, the characters had edges, and the politics, while played for laughs, had a sneaky relevance. Governor Gatling was clueless, but kind. Clayton Endicott was pompous. Miss Krause was a perfectionist with a secret soft heart. And Benson? Benson was the one who made it all work. He was calm when everyone else panicked, thoughtful when others were foolish, funny without needing to be the loudest one in the room. And that made him revolutionary in a time of sitcom caricatures. The show managed to be accessible while still doing something ambitious. And that tension between broad humor and quiet progress gave it staying power. For 7 seasons, Benson delivered consistent laughs, strong performances, and a worldview that said competence, decency, and wit were worth rooting for. It never chased headlines. It never got the critical hype of some of its peers. But for those who watched, it became a constant. The kind of show that taught you how to lead with dignity, even when the room was ridiculous. It was progressive without preaching, and funny without flailing. In the golden age of TV, Benson did not just entertain, it challenged assumptions. It gave a platform to a different kind of lead. And in doing so, it gave us a sitcom that mattered, quietly, consistently, and with more grace than most. WKRP in Cincinnati was a mess, but that was the whole idea. A sitcom set in a struggling AM radio station in Ohio. It was chaotic, weird, fast-talking, and oddly tender. The staff at WKRP were a mix of has-beens, never-will-be's, and genuine believers in something better. And somehow, that mess of personalities made it one of the most beloved shows of its time. Andy was the idealistic program director. Johnny Fever was the burned-out DJ with a soft spot under the shades. Venus Flytrap was smooth and soulful. Jennifer was sharp, elegant, and always 3 steps ahead of everyone. Herb was a salesman with no taste. Les Nessman won awards for news and built imaginary office walls. It was absurd, and it worked. The show captured a time when radio was changing, when disco, rock, and punk were all fighting for airtime. It felt local, scrappy, human. Episodes ranged from slapstick to satire. One minute you had a turkey drop gone horribly wrong. The next, a quiet meditation on censorship or commercialism. WKRP was a comedy, yes, but it had depth. It gave space for its characters to fail, to learn, to be ridiculous and still be worth rooting for. That kind of empathy is rare in any genre, especially sitcoms. The laughs were there, but so was the care. You believed this staff loved the station, even when they hated each other. You understood why they kept showing up. And by the end of the episode, you kind of wanted to work there too. It ran for 4 seasons, never becoming a massive hit, but gaining a cult following that only grew with time. Music rights issues kept it from wide syndication, and that hurt its legacy. But among those who saw it, WKRP became a kind of secret handshake, a reminder of when sitcoms could be wild and warm in the same breath. In the golden age of TV, WKRP in Cincinnati stood out by not trying to be perfect. It let the static in, it made noise, and in doing so, it found something real. Too Close for Comfort was pure early 1980s oddity. A cartoonist father, his 2 adult daughters, a pink and purple San Francisco apartment building, and a stuffed cow named Cosmic. The setup was strange. The jokes were broad, and somehow it all worked, because it never pretended to be anything more than what it was, a goofy, affectionate snapshot of changing family life at a very specific moment in time. Ted Knight, fresh off his iconic role on The Mary Tyler Moore Show, brought just the right blend of bluster and bewilderment to the role of Henry Rush. As the conservative dad struggling to adapt to his daughter's independence and San Francisco's quirks, he gave the show its grounding. His wife, Muriel, was calm and clever. The daughters were smart and opinionated. And then there was Monroe. Monroe Ficus, played by Jim J. Bullock, was the kind of sitcom character who could only have existed in that era. Flamboyant, awkward, earnest, and completely unforgettable. He was never officially labeled as gay, but everything about the character hinted at a queer-coded presence that network sitcoms were not quite ready to talk about directly. His role brought both tension and comedy, and for many viewers, recognition. Monroe was the kind of character people either laughed at or quietly related to. And in a decade that loved tidy definitions, he made space for something looser and more complex. The humor was often physical and a little surreal. Henry getting stuck in doorways, Muriel's dry comebacks, Monroe's entrances that seemed timed for maximum chaos. And underneath it all, there was this sense of a family trying to hold on to its rhythm as everything around them shifted: jobs, cities, roles, and the shape of sitcoms themselves. Too Close for Comfort changed networks more than once. It moved to syndication. It got rebranded as The Ted Knight Show in its final run. The quality varied, and by the end, it felt like a show out of time. But during its core seasons, it was something special. Not because it was polished, but because it was willing to be strange. It came out of an era when sitcoms still ran on live audience energy and physical gags, but it hinted at something else, more surreal, more stylized, more bent at the edges. You could feel the shift in what sitcoms were allowed to be. Too Close for Comfort was never a critic's darling, but for those who grew up watching it, it was a snapshot of something real, even if it came wrapped in a cow puppet and a whole lot of pink paint. And today, it feels like a show you could only get from the golden age of TV. Too sincere for irony, too weird for the mainstream, and too memorable to forget. It's a Living was never the biggest sitcom on television, but it was one of the most distinct. A workplace comedy set in the lounge of a fancy Los Angeles restaurant, with cocktail waitresses as the leads, it gave viewers something rare, a show about working women, friendship, and glamour, without the fairy tale. The women wore glamorous uniforms. They dealt with fussy diners and picky chefs. They balanced dreams with rent, flirtation with exhaustion, and they supported each other, even when they were at odds. That is what made it different. At a time when sitcoms usually focused on families or offices, It's a Living focused on service, and the women who made it work. These were not caricatures. They were ambitious, messy, vulnerable, and sharp. The show was unapologetically female, in tone, in rhythm, in theme. It centered around camaraderie without turning into sentimentality, and it gave each waitress her own point of view, which made the ensemble feel real. Ann Jillian stood out immediately, platinum blonde, sharp-tongued, and unforgettable. Her character Cassie was both the wisecracker and the anchor. The rest of the cast rotated a bit over the years, but the chemistry stayed. Crystal Bernard came in during later seasons and brought warmth and a new kind of energy. And the boss, played by Richard Stahl, was flustered, fussy, and always one step behind. The show aired for just 2 seasons on network television before being canceled. But then came something rare, a syndication revival. It returned for 4 more seasons, largely intact. And that second life is where the show really found its groove. The humor was fast, the setting never changed much, but the stories deepened. You saw friendships evolve, careers stall or take off, dates go badly, dreams adjust. And through it all, there was laughter. Not from punchlines, but from recognition. It's a Living was never flashy, but it offered something that is still too rare, a sitcom about women's work, made with respect and wit. And that is exactly why it stuck with the people who watched it. There was no breakout star, no giant cultural moment, but there was consistency, charm, style, and the quiet comfort of seeing people do the job together. You could only have gotten a show like It's a Living during the golden age of TV, when syndication still gave shows a second chance, and when audiences had room for something a little offbeat. That second chance? It made all the difference. Soap was a sitcom like no other, and that was the whole point. Premiering in 1977, it announced itself as a parody of daytime soap operas, with melodrama, cliffhangers, twin switches, and a narrator explaining the plot. But within that setup was something wild, a network sitcom that dared to be completely, unapologetically strange. The show centered on 2 sisters and their extended families, one rich and dysfunctional, the other working class and neurotic. Murders, affairs, aliens, cults, exorcisms, it was all on the table. And somehow it worked. Soap broke rules left and right. It featured one of the first openly gay characters in network primetime. It included a ventriloquist and his dummy as separate characters. It tackled serious topics, sexuality, war trauma, race, while still pushing the boundaries of absurdity. It was wild, chaotic, fearless, and smarter than people gave it credit for. The cast was stacked: Katherine Helmond, Billy Crystal, Richard Mulligan, Robert Guillaume. Each brought something big, specific, and oddly believable to the chaos. You believed these people, even when the stories went off the rails. Critics were divided, censors were outraged. Some affiliates refused to air it, but audiences tuned in, and many of them stayed. The secret to Soap's success was not just the shock value, it was the writing. The show managed to balance farce with humanity. Even in its weirdest moments, there was an emotional thread. Characters changed. Consequences landed. And in between the laughs, it made room for things no other sitcom dared touch. Soap never won over the industry. It was canceled after 4 seasons, with a major cliffhanger that never got resolved. But that ending did not erase what the show accomplished. It proved that sitcoms could be serialized, that absurdity and empathy could live side by side, that stories could be strange, bold, and still ring true. Soap was messy, unpredictable, and impossible to describe to anyone who did not see it. But for the people who did, it was unforgettable. And that, right there, is why it belongs to the golden age. Because only in that window of television could something this risky, this ambitious, and this deeply human have ever made it to air. Mr. Belvadier was a sitcom that never should have worked, and somehow that was its greatest strength. A snooty British butler moves in with a blue-collar American family in Pittsburgh? That pitch sounds like a parody of a sitcom, not the real thing. But it worked because it did not fight its own weirdness. It embraced it. Christopher Hewitt played Belvadier with total commitment, calm, refined, sarcastic, and quietly loving. And as odd as the setup was, it gave the show room to explore something genuine. Beneath the jokes and accents, this was a show about boundaries, class, age, manners, and what happens when you cross them with respect. Belvadier helped the family, but he also challenged them. He got involved in their problems, but not without commentary. His bond with Wesley, the youngest son, was the show's heartbeat, half mentorship, half battle of wits. The writing leaned into issues more than you'd expect: racism, disability, assault, even AIDS. It was still a network sitcom with a laugh track, but it was not afraid to stop the laughs when it needed to. Mr. Belvadier never chased cool or ratings trends. It was slow, odd, and charming, and that made it stand out. And for a certain kind of viewer, it felt quietly radical. The show ended without flash, without much fanfare. But for 5 years, it offered something surprisingly thoughtful in the middle of a primetime lineup. That strange little show with the British butler and the Midwest family earned its place in the golden age. Because sometimes, sitcoms do not have to make sense. They just have to make you feel like someone, somewhere, is paying attention. Square Pegs captured a moment that no other sitcom dared to touch, what it really felt like to be awkward in high school. Not cool awkward, not fake nerdy, just two teenage girls, out of step, out of sync, and desperate to figure out where they fit. It only lasted 1 season, but that was enough to make it matter. Sarah Jessica Parker and Amy Linker played Patty and Lauren with the kind of honesty that never felt manufactured. They were not chasing boys with confidence. They were fumbling through it. They were not getting into zany hijinks. They were navigating cafeteria politics and hallway embarrassment. The show did not glamorize high school, and it did not fake empowerment. It was raw, sweet, and sometimes sad. The jokes were subtle. The references were punk, new wave, and unmistakably 1980s. Square Pegs did not try to make outsiders seem cool. It just said, "Here they are." And that made it feel more real than anything else on television. Critics loved it. A cult following quickly formed. But the network pulled the plug after just 20 episodes. Still, for the people who saw it, and especially for the ones who felt like Patty and Lauren, it never went away. It was not about triumph. It was about trying. And in that way, it was one of the most honest teen sitcoms of the golden age. Newhart was quiet, slow, and weird, and that was the magic of it. It dropped viewers into a sleepy Vermont inn and told them, "We're not in a rush. Just stay a while." Bob Newhart played the innkeeper with his signature deadpan, always reacting, always just a half second behind everyone else. The townspeople were the real stars: Larry, Daryl and Daryl, Stephanie and Michael, George the handyman. They were all strange, all lovable, and all completely uninterested in acting like normal sitcom characters. The show never chased punchlines. It built its comedy through rhythms, small moments, misunderstandings, the slow reveal of just how off-kilter this little town really was. And it never apologized for its pace. It trusted the audience to wait for the joke, to sit in the silence, to love characters because they were odd, not despite it. That kind of comedy is rare, and even rarer now. But Newhart's biggest trick was in how it ended. After 8 years, the final episode revealed that the entire show had been a dream, a callback to Bob Newhart's previous sitcom, The Bob Newhart Show. It was surreal, it was bold, and it was one of the greatest finales in television history. Newhart was the kind of sitcom you could only get in the golden age, one that did not fight for your attention, but earned it by being unmistakably itself. If one of these shows brought back a memory you didn't know you missed, tell us in the comments, tap subscribe for more like this, and give the video a like, because sometimes the best sitcoms are the ones we quietly carried with us all along.